Visibility drops to zero. The father's dive light flickers somewhere behind his son. He signals one thing: keep moving. The sun surfaces at Friedman's sink. One tank was nearly empty. He watches the water below. No light rises behind him. Recovery divers found the father 2 days later. His body was found in a dome, 100 feet from the exit his son had just climbed through. 10 feet in the right direction, and he probably would have made it. In zero visibility, with empty tanks, he had no way to know which way that was. No single decision that day was reckless. No dramatic stunt. Just a chain of reasonable choices that burned through every margin until there was nothing left for the last 100 feet. This is how that chain built itself. They weren't clueless tourists on a first-time scuba trip. They were two father and son pairs, longtime friends, and each of the sons in their teens. All four had intro to cave training and roughly 100 logged dive each. Not experts, but not beginners either. The fathers had taught their sons to dive the way they'd learned themselves. Conservative, careful, never push a dive you're not ready for. And this trip was supposed to be the next step in that progression. Manatee Springs State Park sits on top of a big underwater cave system with several known entrances: Friedman's Sink, Sioux Sink, Catfish Hotel, and a bunch of other smaller openings. Cave divers loved this system for its clear spring water and long passages. But Manatee Springs has also killed people, including at least one diver who got disoriented near the hot spring area, which sits dangerously close to the route they were planning to take. Local guides warn about the strong current and the silty floor that can turn clear water into a brown cloud if you kick too hard. The plan was ambitious for a first visit. Enter at Friedman's Sink, ride the current downstream through the system, exit at Catfish Hotel. The current would carry them in. Easy swimming, fresh legs, plenty of air. But currents don't reverse when you change your mind. If anything forced them to turn around, that same water pushing them forward would become a wall. And they'd be fighting it exhausted, stressed, burning air at a rate their gas plan never accounted for. The cave literally locks behind you the moment you swim in. This was going to be their first dive in Manatee Springs and was also their first ever cave traverse, entering one hole and exiting another. Most experienced cave divers, when visiting a new system for the first time, do a series of short familiarization dives. Swim partway in, turn around, come back out, build a mental map over several visits. And they were planning to swim the whole thing in one go. On paper, they seemed ready for that risk. Side-mounted tanks for extra gas, multiple lights. A mental picture of the cave system from a video. But a mental picture isn't muscle memory, and muscle memory is what you need when visibility drops to zero. They dropped in just after 11 a.m. Teenagers out front, fathers behind on the same guideline, current at their backs. The first real problem shows up when they reach the end of the permanent line near what they believe is the Catfish Hotel exit. Up to this point, the mental model is simple. Follow the line, it'll take you to the exit. For a lot of learners, that's exactly how cave diving is presented. Instead, they arrive at nothing obvious. In front of them, there's silted up brown water and darkness. No clear upward tunnel. No obvious way out that matches what they saw in the video. One of the sons even wonders if they're in the wrong place completely. The report notes that he writes Manatee on his slate, referring to the dangerous hot spring area where another diver had died previously. They had a spool, 15 feet of line, clip it to the main guideline, swim through the silt, and they would have seen the exit. It was right there, but they didn't use it. And that's the thing about margins. You don't know you've spent them until you need them back. Instead, the doubt won and they turned around. On the surface, that sounds like the conservative, safety-minded call. And in some ways it is, but here's the part they seem not to fully appreciate at that moment. On the way in, the current was helping them. Now, every meter on the way out will be against that same flow. And to make things harder, they don't completely regroup and replan as a four-person team. From this point on, they start acting more like two separate father and son pairs, each with its own assumptions about distance, who's following whom, and how much air everyone has left. Here is the interesting thing. When they turn to dive, their gigs don't show a crisis yet. One of the fathers checks his pressure and sees about 3100 psi left. That means he's only used around 700 psi on the easy downstream swim so far. By the classic rule of thirds in cave diving, you use 1/3 of your gas going in, 1/3 coming out, and keep 1/3 as a reserve. That number looks fine on paper. The problem is that this rule quietly assumes similar conditions in both directions. You might think that's just panic, but your body doesn't care what your mind is doing. When you're pulling yourself hand over hand against fast-moving water, your body works hard and demands more air. Add stress on top of that, and your consumption climbs even higher. This dive breaks the neat, simple assumptions behind their gas plan the moment they turn around. The lead pair, one of the father and his son, aim for an emergency exit they know about: sousing. They start hauling themselves along the guideline hand over hand, fighting the current. The trailing pair falls behind in thicker silt and worse visibility. The father is using a bright video light. It helps him see his immediate surroundings, but it also turns every particle in the water into a blinding snowstorm. Bright enough to see his own hands, not enough to catch the turn that could have saved his life. Right here. This is where the dive could have been saved. If they'd regrouped as a four-person team, if they'd checked gas as a group, if anyone had said, "We're going to sousing together no matter what." But they didn't. And from this point, they're running two separate dives with two separate fates. The lead pair stays on the guideline towards sousing, keep pulling against the current, and eventually find the narrow shaft up and out. They surface with gas still left in their tanks. Shaken, but alive. They get their mask off, take a breath of air, and then realize the other father and son are nowhere in sight. According to the report, that father calls 911 as soon as he can, which lines up with what most cave rescue experts recommend at that stage. He's done what he can underwater. From here, it's on the rescuers. Meanwhile, the other branch of this story is still unfolding underwater. The trailing father and son never make that right-hand turn towards sousing. In the low visibility and silt, they miss the junction and keep following the main guideline downstream, unintentionally heading all the way back toward their original entry point at Freedom and Sink. The son is still out in front, moving faster. His father is behind him, tiring and running low on gas. At some point in the final stretch, the father signaled his son forward, effectively putting his kid's chances of survival ahead of his own. The son reaches the narrow vertical opening at Freedom and Sink and manages to climb out. One of his tanks is almost empty. The other still has some gas left. He surfaces expecting to see his dad's light right behind him. Instead, that little pool at Freedman's stays quiet. At some point, he no longer sees his father lights below. We can't fill in the blanks of those seconds, but you can imagine what it's like to realize you can't safely go back down and your dad hasn't come up. Later on, specialist recovery divers enter the system from another sink. They find the father's camera and light on the cave floor, and then his body in a dome area about 100 feet from the exit. He died incredibly close to a way out. But the chain of decisions built up over the previous hour left almost no margin for that last stretch. One teenager lost his father that day. Another watched a friend's family change forever. On a timeline, this stops looking like a freak accident. It starts looking like a pattern. Every choice looked reasonable. Every decision could be defended. And still, somewhere in that chain, probably the place that seemed most obviously safe, was the moment they locked themselves in. The exit was 100 feet away. In the right direction, it might as well have been inches. In the direction he went, it might as well have been miles. They found him in a dome, facing the wrong way. And the question this leaves us with is how many of our own margins look fine on paper until the current turn against us?